A heavy rain falls, gunfire cracks through the air like thunder. Black cars speed through the soaked streets, headlights slicing the darkness. Inside one of them sits Alessio Romano, 38, the once feared Mafia kingpin of Romano City. His face is bruised, his eyes sharp but wearied. He watches the chaos outside. His empire burning. D'Alessio. When you build an empire with blood, you'll lose it the same way. A few loyal men stand around a table scattered with maps and weapons. They're drenched, tense, and scared. Marcello, his right-hand man, they've taken the East Dock boss. The Rossi are everywhere. Alessio. Calmly, then we move. Tonight. Marcello. Move. To where? Alessio. Somewhere no one knows my name. He opens a drawer, pulls out a small photo. It's his late mother smiling. A rare softness crosses his face. Sirens wail. Two of his cars explode in the distance. His men panic, shouting orders in the rain. Alessio moves through it like a ghost, expressionless. Alessio. In war, silence is your loudest weapon. He slips into an unmarked van, alone. The driver doesn't speak, only drives fast through the narrow alleys. Alessio dials a number. Johnny, one of his oldest men, answers with panic in his voice. Johnny. Boss, they've got the warehouse. Alessio. Listen to me. You take whoever's left. Go dark. No phones. No names. You'll hear from me when the time is right. Johnny. But where will you go, boss? Alessio. Somewhere I can't be found. Even by myself. He hangs up. The rain grows heavier. A plane taking off under false documents. Alessio's hand gripping his passport with a new name. Alessandro Ricci. Small suitcase. No guards. No gold rings. No guns. His old mansion fades in the distance. Now burning. He steps out of the airport. A strange language fills the air, one he doesn't understand. Billboards, taxis, voices. Everything feels foreign. He tightens his coat, walking into the unknown. Alessio. In my city, even the walls whispered my name here. I'm just another stranger with a past too heavy to carry. Alessio sits by the window, looking at the quiet street below. He struggles with the food he ordered. The taste is different, the words on the menu unreadable. He reaches for his phone. A message flashes on a secure app. Everything lost. Waiting for your word, Dawn. He deletes it instantly. Then silence. The sound of distant music plays from a nearby cafe. The same song his mother once sang, for the first time. His eyes glistened. Alessio. Maybe this city doesn't need another monster. Maybe I can just breathe again. The new city was nothing like the one Alessio left behind here. The streets were calm, too calm. A strange kind of silence that almost felt suspicious to a man who had spent half his life listening for footsteps in the dark. The people smiled easily. The air smelled of bread and coffee, and no one seemed to recognize the weight of sin in another man's eyes. For the first few days, Alessio barely spoke to anyone. He rented a small apartment above an old bookstore, the kind of place where time seemed forgotten. The walls were thin, and at night he could hear the faint laughter from the cafe across the street. It was always full, always alive. He would sit by his window, cigarette smoke curling through the air, watching strangers live lives untouched by blood or loyalty. He didn't understand their language. The words they spoke were soft and quick, flowing like water, but to him they were meaningless sounds. He tried once to buy groceries and ended up pointing at things like a lost child. The cashier smiled politely, but the embarrassment stayed with him. It was a strange thing for a man who once commanded hundreds, to now struggle to ask for bread. Still, every night, he kept in touch with his men, not by phone, but through coded messages sent across secure lines. His orders were brief. Stay hidden. Gather strength. Trust no one. The war was not over. Even if the city outside looked peaceful. Days passed. Then weeks, and slowly, Alessio began to fade into the crowd. Until her. She came one cold morning, like an echo from a world he thought he'd buried. He had entered the cafe he'd watched for days, mostly to taste something warm, but also to feel a part of humanity again. The air smelled of roasted beans and vanilla. People spoke, laughed, and lived freely. He sat in a corner, eyes low, hat pulled down, the same way he'd sat in 100 smoky bars before meetings that ended in blood. Then she approached. The waitress. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, but her eyes carried a quiet strength. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands falling around her face as she balanced a tray with practiced grace. When she reached his table, she smiled. Not the fake smile people give customers, but something real. She spoke in the local language, and he only stared blankly. She tried again, slower. He didn't respond. There was a small, awkward silence before she tilted her head slightly and said, in perfect Italian, "Coffee." His heart froze for weeks. He hadn't heard his own language spoken by anyone but himself. It felt like a knife, sharp, sudden, and painfully familiar. He looked up, truly looking at her now. "Yes," he answered, his voice low and used to softness. That one word began something neither of them could stop after that day. He came often. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to listen to her speak. Her name was Elena, and though she worked as a waitress, she spoke like someone who had read too many books and seen too much life. She didn't ask questions, not at first. But she watched him closely. The way he kept to himself, the faint scars on his hands, the eyes that seemed to have lived 1,000 stories. She didn't know who he was. But she knew he carried something heavy inside him. And Alessio. He tried to keep her at a distance. He told himself she was just a voice in a foreign city, nothing more. Yet, he found himself returning again and again, sitting in that same corner seat, waiting for the sound of his language to reach him. Sometimes she would sit with him after her shift, bringing a cup for herself. They would talk about simple things mostly. The city, the weather, music. But beneath the words, there was a growing connection neither dared to name. For the first time in years, Alessio felt something unfamiliar. Not love yet, but peace. And for a man like him, peace was dangerous. One evening, as he watched her laugh softly over a story she told, he realized he hadn't thought about blood or revenge for an entire hour. That frightened him more than any bullet ever had. Because peace meant weakness, and weakness in his world always came before death. Still, he came back the next day, and the one after that. Because somehow in that quiet cafe, surrounded by strangers and the smell of coffee, a broken man began to remember what it felt like to be human. The days in the new city began to lose their sharp edges. Time no longer rushed for Alessio. It drifted, soft and unpredictable, like smoke curling from a candle's flame. The chaos of his old life seemed distant, almost unreal, yet it still pulsed beneath his skin like a heartbeat he could not silence. Every morning, he would wake before dawn. The streets below his apartment were quiet, painted with the dim orange glow of streetlights. He would sit by the window, coffee in hand, watching the city come alive. The vendors setting up their stalls, children in uniforms running to school, and the elderly man who swept the same corner every morning. It was so different from Romano City. There, mornings began with orders and ended with blood. Here it began with sunlight, footsteps, and the smell of bread. He told himself he liked it that way. He told himself he was done with that life. But deep down he knew the truth. Men like him didn't just disappear. They hid until the world came knocking again. Still, each day he went to the cafe. And each day Elena was there. She had a warmth that cut through the silence he carried. When she smiled, it was never hurried. It was as though she saw him. Not the name, not the past, but the man who sat alone with eyes that never rested. Sometimes they spoke for hours, sometimes barely at all, and yet, the silence between them never felt empty. It was comfortable, like the space between two songs. Elena had a curious mind. She asked questions gently, never pushing, never demanding. Where was he from? What did he do before? Why did he come here? He would answer carefully, always choosing his words like stepping through a minefield. I worked in trade, he'd say, or I needed a quieter life. She didn't believe him, not fully, but she didn't press. There was a quiet understanding between them. She knew he carried ghosts, and he knew she wouldn't force them out. As the weeks passed, Alessio began to notice the details about her. The way she hummed softly while cleaning the tables. The way her hands moved quickly when she wrote, but her words were neat and careful. She always gave part of her meal to a stray cat that waited by the cafe door. It was those small things. Not her beauty, not her kindness, but her gentleness, that began to undo him. He found himself thinking about her when he shouldn't. When he was checking his hidden messages from his men. When he heard sirens in the distance. When he caught his reflection in the mirror and saw the lines of a man who'd lived too long in the dark point one night, the cafe closed later than usual. Elena was wiping down the counter, and Alessio stayed behind, finishing his drink. Rain began to fall outside, light at first, then heavy, turning the street into a mirror of lights. "You should go before it gets worse," she told him. He looked outside. "I've seen worse than rain," he replied. She smiled faintly. "You always say things like that. As if you've lived twice already." He didn't answer. There were truths that didn't belong in this city. Elena hesitated, then added softly, "You don't have to tell me anything. But whatever you're running from, I hope it never finds you here." Her voice trembled slightly on that last word, and for the first time in years, Alessio felt something sharp twist inside him, something dangerously close to tenderness. He looked at her, truly looked, not as a waitress, not as a stranger, but as someone who had unknowingly stepped into the cracks of his ruined soul and lit a candle there. "Maybe it already has," he whispered. She didn't understand what he meant. Maybe she didn't need to. That night, back in his apartment, he couldn't sleep. He stood by the window again, watching the rain blur the city lights. His phone buzzed once, a message from an encrypted contact. "Boss, we found him. One of the men who betrayed you. What are your orders?" He stared at the screen for a long time. His fingers hovered over the reply button. The old Alessio would have given the order without hesitation. A name, a location, a death, but now... He hesitated. He thought of Elena, of her smile, of her saying she hoped nothing ever found him again. And for the first time in his life, he deleted a message without replying. The next day, when he walked into the cafe, Elena was sitting by the window, reading a book. She looked up, surprised, then smiled. "You're early today," she said. He sat across from her quietly. For a while they just watched the rain outside. "You know," she said suddenly, "people here don't sit in silence this long unless they're in love." He looked at her, eyes unreadable. "And what do you think we are?" She laughed softly. "Two people who understand silence, maybe." He nodded slowly. "Then perhaps that's enough." Outside, the sky cleared, leaving behind a golden glow that painted the cafe in warmth, but miles away, in another city, men still whispered his name. Men who hadn't forgotten the blood owed to them. The peace he'd found was fragile, temporary, and somewhere deep inside, Alessio felt it. The calm before another storm, but for now, he chose silence. He chose her, and for the first time in a long, violent life, he chose to stay. The city had begun to feel familiar. The sharp strangeness that once made Alessio feel like a ghost in a foreign world had softened into something almost comforting. The faces on the street no longer looked suspicious. The mornings didn't carry the same weight of danger. And at the cafe, where he spent most of his afternoons, Elena's presence had become as essential to him as air. Their bond had grown quietly, built not on words, but on the small, unnoticed moments that made ordinary days feel sacred. The way she saved him his usual seat near the window. The way she'd tease him about how seriously he read the newspaper, even though he barely understood half of it. The way she'd laugh when he tried to pronounce local phrases and failed miserably. She made him laugh too, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. But peace has a way of testing the kind of man who was born from chaos. For Alessio, calmness always came with suspicion. It was too still, too silent. One evening the cafe was almost empty. The golden light from the hanging lamps made everything feel softer, like the world had slowed down just for them. Elena was behind the counter, counting the day's earnings. Alessio sat at his usual spot, watching her absent-mindedly stir her coffee, lost in thought. He found himself wondering what she saw when she looked at him, a quiet man with sad eyes. Or could she sense the ghosts behind his silence? The moment broke when a group of rough-looking men entered the cafe, loud, careless, carrying the kind of energy Alessio instantly recognized. They weren't locals. Their accents were too familiar. Italian. His body stiffened. They took a table near the back, laughing too loud, throwing glances around the cafe. One of them wore a silver ring with a snake emblem, a mark Alessio had seen before. Grossi family. His enemies. He turned his face slightly toward the window, his heart beating in slow, controlled rhythm. Years of survival trained him to move only when necessary. Elena noticed his sudden stillness. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He forced a small nod. "Fine." But his mind was already calculating. Exits, blind spots, the distance to his gun hidden under his coat. The men didn't stay long, just ordered drinks and left. But the message was clear, they had found him. That night, Alessio didn't go home immediately. He walked the narrow streets, blending into the shadows. The city felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. His instincts screamed, move, disappear again. But something inside him refused. He couldn't leave this time, he couldn't leave her. The next morning he went to the cafe earlier than usual. Elena was there, arranging flowers on the tables. She looked up surprised. "You're early," she smiled. "Couldn't sleep." He studied her face, the kindness in her eyes, the innocence that didn't belong in his world. He wanted to tell her everything. To confess that he wasn't the quiet stranger she thought he was. That his hands had held both power and death. That every peaceful moment he gave her was borrowed time. But how could he? So he simply said, "Something like that." They sat together, and for a while silence filled the space again. Not awkward but heavy. He watched her laugh over something on her phone, and he wondered what would happen if the truth came out. Would she run? Would she hate him? Would she see the monster he'd buried under this quiet life? That evening, the truth came closer than he expected. Elena had stayed behind to close the cafe. Alessio offered to help, and she accepted with a playful smile. She was stacking chairs when her eyes fell on the edge of his coat, the glint of cold steel beneath the fabric. A gun, she froze. He noticed instantly. "Elena," he started, but she took a small step back, eyes wide with disbelief. "What is that?" she whispered. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't exist. "Protection," he said finally. "Protection from what?" Silenced, he looked away. He couldn't lie anymore, not to her. "I told you I came here to start over," he said slowly. "But the truth is, you can't start over when the past still breathes." Her voice shook. "Who are you really?" Alessio exhaled deeply, his eyes dark with years of secrets. "I was someone powerful once," he said. "Someone feared. But power has a price, and I've been paying it ever since." Elena stared at him, trying to piece together the fragments of the quiet man she thought she knew. The realization was like a storm crashing through her chest. You're not just some traveler, are you?" "No," he said quietly. "I'm a man who's trying to disappear." She turned away, her voice trembling. "And you brought that danger here. To this city. To me." "I never meant to," he whispered. But meaning didn't matter anymore. The cafe felt colder now. The laughter, the lightness, all gone. Elena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think." He nodded. "Take all the time you need." As she walked away, Alessio felt the kind of pain he had never known. Not from bullets, not from betrayal. This was different. This was the pain of losing something pure. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at his reflection. The man in the mirror looked exactly like the one he'd always been. Dangerous, cold, unreachable. And yet, he felt more human than ever. He picked up his phone and typed a single message to his men. "Do not come for me. Not yet." He deleted it before sending, because the truth was, he didn't know what he wanted anymore. Revenge or redemption. And somewhere across the city, a young woman lay awake too, replaying every smile, every word, every silence between them, now painted with questions she didn't want answered. The morning after Elena learned the truth, the city felt different. Colder, heavier, almost as if it shared her silence. The cafe. She worked with her usual calmness, but her smile had vanished. The customers didn't notice, but Alessio did. He saw it from across the street, where he sat hidden under a hood, watching her through the glass window he once used to watch the world heal him. She didn't look for him that day, and he didn't dare go inside. Every step he took toward her door felt like betrayal. Betrayal to the peace she once gave him, to the illusion that he could ever live a normal life. He had brought the storm with him. And he knew it wouldn't stop until it swallowed them both. That night, Alessio's instincts began to Scream again, a noise too familiar to ignore. He was walking home from a quiet side street when he felt it. Eyes on him. A car idled at the corner, lights off. A man stood beside it, pretending to smoke. Old habits returned like muscle memory. He kept walking, slow, calculated, and in the faint reflection of a window he saw it, the silver ring with a snake emblem. The Rossi were here. He turned the corner and slipped into the shadows of an alleyway, breathing in the damp air. His mind moved faster than his pulse. Escape routes, distance to the cafe, number of men, possible weapons. But behind all the calculation, one name repeated in his mind: Elena. They would find her. They always found what he loved. By dawn, the quiet city erupted into tension. Alessio had gathered what little remained of his strength. A small gun, some cash, a burner phone. His plan was simple. Get Elena, get out, vanish again. But when he reached the cafe, she was already there, unlocking the doors for the morning. "Elena," he called softly. She froze. Turned slowly. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "I told you I needed time." "There is no time," he said. "They found me. They'll come for you too." Confusion flashed across her face. "What are you talking about?" "Men from my past. Dangerous ones. You need to leave this city now." She shook her head. "No, I'm not going anywhere. You brought this danger, Alessio. You fix it." Her words hit him harder than a bullet, and yet he couldn't blame her. "I will," he said quietly. "But not if you're here. Please, Elena. Go." She wanted to resist, to fight him, to demand the truth. But the fear in his voice was something she'd never heard before. It wasn't the fear of dying. It was the fear of losing her. They didn't have long to argue. The sound of tires screeching against pavement shattered the quiet morning. 3 black cars stopped in front of the cafe. Alessio moved instantly, pulling her behind the counter, his gun already drawn. "What's happening?" she whispered, panic rising. "Stay low," he said sharply. "No matter what." Glass shattered. Men with masks poured into the cafe. Guns raised. The Rossi. "Romano!" one of them shouted. "The king has fallen far, hasn't he?" Alessio fired first. A clean, quick shot that dropped the man by the door. Then chaos broke loose. The cafe, once filled with laughter and coffee and peace, became a war zone. Bullets tore through tables. The smell of smoke filled the air. Elena screamed as shards of glass rained around them. Alessio moved like the man he once was. Fast, ruthless, precise. The calm, quiet stranger was gone. In his place stood the ghost of the Mafia kingpin, controlled fury in human form. Within minutes, the floor was littered with broken furniture and silence. The few who survived fled into the street, dragging their wounded with them. Alessio stood over the last man, breathing hard, gun still raised. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man coughed, blood on his lips. "Rossi wants your head." "And hers." Alessio's eyes darkened. He pulled the trigger. Elena stared at him from behind the counter, shaking. Her hands trembled, her face pale with shock. You killed them," she whispered. He turned slowly toward her. His shirt was stained, his hands trembling, but his eyes were calm, too calm. "They would have killed you," he said softly. She took a step back. "You said you wanted to start over. This isn't starting over. This is who you are." He didn't deny it. "I tried to change," he said, voice low. "You made me want to. But men like me don't get to walk away from the things we've done." Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't look at him with warmth. She looked at him with fear. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said. He looked at her quietly, then lowered the gun. "You do," he said. "You always did." Minutes later, sirens echoed in the distance. The city's peace was broken. Alessio turned to her one last time. "I'll draw them away," he said. "You'll be safe." "Where will you go?" she asked, voice breaking. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides too much pain. "Where monsters belong." Before she could stop him, he was gone, slipping into the rain and vanishing into the city that once promised him peace. That night, the news spread fast. Reports of a shootout, a mysterious man, an unknown woman. Elena sat alone in her apartment, staring at the photo she'd taken of him weeks ago. A quiet moment, a rare smile, a man she thought she knew. Somewhere, out there in the dark, Alessio was bleeding again. But not from bullets this time. From the weight of love, and from the truth that no matter how far he ran, peace was never meant for men like him. The city burned for 3 nights, fire tore through the alleys, glass shattered, and the sound of sirens echoed endlessly. When it was over, only ashes remained. Ashes and silence. Everyone thought Alessio died in that war. Everyone except Elena, who still felt him somewhere beyond the smoke, alive in a world that refused to let go of him. She never saw him again. Weeks passed. Then months. Until one cold morning, as she wiped tables at the cafe that had somehow survived the chaos, the doorbell chimed, and an envelope slid under the door. No name on the front. No address. Just a black seal. The kind only one man she knew would use. Her heart stopped. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a letter, folded neatly, written in the same calm, deliberate handwriting she'd once seen when he scribbled notes on napkins, and as she began to read, her tears fell before she even reached the second line. My Elena, if you're reading this, it means I've done what I promised. I've disappeared, you don't need to worry. I survived the last war. Not without scars, but I'm still breathing. I lost almost everyone. The men who once called me boss, brothers, soldiers, all gone. I buried too many faces I cared about. And for once, I didn't have the strength to start another war. I carry injuries that time alone can't heal. I'm somewhere far from everything. A quiet place by the sea where no one knows my name. The doctors say I'll recover, though the pain never truly leaves. But maybe that's my punishment. Or my reminder I wanted to reach out sooner. Every night I thought of it. Every night I thought of you. But I realized something. Your safety is the only peace I have left. If I ever come near you, they'll come too. My enemies don't rest, even when I'm silent, so I made my choice. To love you from afar. You once told me that love means wanting someone to be happy, even if it's not with you. I didn't understand it then. I do now that I've enclosed a check. A small piece of what's left of the world I built in blood. I don't need it anymore. I want you to live the life I never could. Open that cafe you dreamed of owning. Travel. Laugh again. Fall in love again if you can. Just don't look for me. Please. Knowing you're safe is enough. That's my peace. And if the wind ever carries this letter to your heart, remember me not as the man who brought chaos, but as the stranger who finally found meaning in your eyes. Always, Alessio. Elena pressed the letter to her chest, her tears falling silently onto the paper. She looked inside the envelope again. And there it was, a check with a number she could hardly believe. Enough to change her life forever. But it wasn't the money that broke her. It was the way he still protected her. Even in absence, she walked to the window, watching the sunlight spill over the street. For a moment she imagined him, somewhere far away by the sea, healing, living quietly under a new name, and she smiled through the tears, because she understood now. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go, and wishing the other person peace. This was Mafia Hearts, the story of Alessio and Elena, where love bloomed in danger, survived through silence, and ended in peace. He loved her enough to vanish. She loved him enough to let him go. Tell me in the comments, should Elena ever find him again? Or should their story end beautifully? Just like this?